All right, folks, this is Harris Sultan, and I've got some good news to share with you. Now, I haven't actually watched this video, but from the shrieks and screams of all these Islamist propagandists, I think Suella Braverman has delivered a very strong speech, and a lot of these Islamists are not happy about it. So, what did she say? We'll check this out in a moment, but I just want to say that this has been one of the biggest objectives of anti Islamist activists like myself. I don't want to be the only person, or I don't want some ex Muslims to be the only people who are talking about the dangers of Islamism in the West. We wanted mainstream politicians, academics, celebrities to recognize the threat of Islamism that all Western countries are facing at the moment. That has always been our biggest goal. In fact, this is the reason why I actually warmed up to Tommy Robinson initially, because when I looked at him, I was like, he is saying everything that people like us have been saying for many years. He actually started way before me. But there is something weird in the West that when an ex Muslim or a brown person says something about Islam, yes, we are ignored, but we're not accused of racism or we're not attacked the same way if a white person were to say the same things about Islam. So when Tommy Robinson started speaking about it, yes, he was vilified, he was attacked, he was ostracized, but truth always wins in the end. And that's why Tommy Robinson, I think, is the biggest activist in the UK right now. But he's not the only one. Other people are starting to talk about it too. It was always clear that Suella Braverman, for some reason, also wanted to recognize the dangers of Islamism. But being a mainstream politician, she obviously always had to bite her tongue or mince her words. But it seems like no more. So have a look at this. So Dilly Hussein just tweeted this. He's quoting Suella Braverman. What happens if the UK falls into the hands of Muslim fundamentalism? Our legal systems get substituted by Sharia, and our nuclear capabilities vest in a regime not dissimilar to that of Iran today. And he's quoting Suella Braverman. And then he shows a photo of an Israeli flag. Like, how, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, Israelis are not saying that they need Jewish Sharia in the UK. Israeli Jews, or Jews in general, they retain their cultural identity or their religious identity, but they don't go in and rip the fabric of the society they're living in. So it's a false comparison. But again, Dili Hussein is an Islamist propagandist. These people never look in the mirror. They always point fingers at other people. Dili Hussein is not alone. Muhammad Jab does that. Daniel Hakikatu does that. They quote problematic verses of the Old Testament as though Jews are actively working on those troublesome passages. That's not the case, but Muslims defend those troublesome passages. So there is no comparison. I will have a problem with radical Jews if they try to implement their Old Testament values onto wider society. Then I'll have a problem. And then you might have a case. But right now you don't have a case. So let's have a look. What does Suella Braverman say? So this is the video. Let's have a listen to what is it that Suella Braverman said that all of these Islamists are up in arms.
Mass migration is an existential threat to the way of life in our country and to Western civilization. And the public, be it in the US or in the UK, have voted time and time again to stop it. However, there is some hope. The tide of this war has turned.
You see how we cannot talk about the threat of Islamism in isolation without mentioning the mass migration that we've been seeing. These two things go hand in hand. It is quite clear that the Muslim Brotherhood had a plan. Bridget Gabriel exposed that many years ago, how they had it in their charter or in their manifesto that we are going to hire prominent people to spread Islamist propaganda. We're going to flood Western countries with Muslims and hope that a lot of our own radical Islamists and jihadis will also slip in. Mass migration and Islamism, these two things are linked together. That's why we need to talk about them together. Yes, not all mass migration is linked to Islamism, but the threat of Islamism is linked to mass migration, if that makes sense.
As Churchill said, this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. Perhaps it is the end of the beginning. Thanks to Trump, free speech, for all its faults, is in the ascendancy. The speed at which DEI and woke institutional policies are crumbling is accelerating, and the malfeasance of government and the mendacity of the administrative state are being exposed with frequent regularity. The prevailing consensus of how multiculturalism was nothing but a benefit is unraveling at pace along with many far left ideologies.
Isn't that amazing that brown people like herself, like myself, we're the ones telling you that we don't need this DEI. We don't need you to keep telling us that multiculturalism always works. It doesn't always work. Yes, it works for the most part, but that doesn't mean that we should close our eyes and just open our doors to every single culture. I've used this example many times before. If there is a culture in which human sacrifice is quite prevalent, would you invite those people in the name of, hey, we treat all cultures equally? Following the culture that you're born into is innate in human psyche. No matter who you are, you do tend to follow your native culture unless you have a total overhaul of your cultural upbringing. For example, ex-Muslims. We grew up in Islam. We identified problems within Islam, and then we distance ourselves from it. This is the reason why a lot of lipstick Muslims, Busha Sheikh, etc., who don't even wear a hijab, she actually took down her hijab. They cannot have that conversation with themselves. They cannot recognize these problems in Islam. And that's why they hold on to their cultural identity. And they end up defending their vile ideology. I don't know. I can't say whether they're doing that willfully or because they're ignorant. I can't put a finger to it, but I think that's irrelevant. What matters is, what are the consequences of your actions? Whether they're lipstick Muslims, Islamist propagandists, or liberal Muslims, doesn't matter what your ideological understanding of Islam is. What matters is, what are the consequences? Now, lipstick Muslims, Islamists, radicals, they are all having a net negative impact on Western society. And that is something to be worried about. I think that's what Suella is talking about.
Progressive thinking is losing. It's losing with the young, it's losing with the old, it's losing with blue and white collar workers alike. And instead, is being forced to take cover in the liberal enclaves of Islington and San Francisco, where they weep at the fall of Justin Trudeau, Starmer's plummeting popularity, and the defeat of Kamala Harris. The re-election of Donald Trump by the American people heralds the potential that this war is winnable.
Yes.
Key questions will emerge. Will this inspire citizens in other nations stuck in this political ideology of the far left to follow suit? More importantly, what will happen in the West if it does not? What will happen if democracy is indeed thwarted by the existing political class?
That will be the end of the West. That will be the end of Western civilization as we know it. And perhaps this is how all great things must come to an end. I mean, the Roman Empire fell. I hope it doesn't happen. I have always said that Western civilization is the greatest civilization humanity has ever come up with. But that is not to say that it will not once be replaced. We might replace it with something better. I don't know what that would be. I can't foresee it. A civilization that values human rights, democracy, free speech. These things are very difficult to manage if you're a state or a government. But the West has been able to do it for at least a century. You can start from a bit further back than that, but at least after the Second World War. We've been living in the best of times, never experienced by humanity. But now, at the turn of this century, the West started losing its way because of one major mistake. They thought all cultures are equal. We should treat all humans equally. There should be equality and equity, but we should not treat all cultures equally. All cultures, all ideologies are not equal. Communism is not equal to the free world. Islamism is not equal to Western civilization. It's not. And expecting that people who come from those cultures will somehow assimilate, integrate, and adopt your values and will not try to replace your system that happens to be the greatest system humanity has ever come up with, that's a mistake.
Vice President J.D. Vance said at the National Conservative Conference, at which I also spoke in the summer here in DC, that the UK was going to be the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons.
A lot of people took it as a joke when J.D. Vance said that. I think even he said it as a joke at that time, but you know what they say, there's always some truth behind just kidding. There was a lot of truth in that. I'm not saying that it's going to happen tomorrow, but a lot of people make this mistake that in order to win elections or in order to be able to change a system, you need to have more than 51%. That's not how representative democracy works. For example, in the UK in the last recent elections. There were a lot of constituencies where Labour won a lot of seats in Muslim-dominated areas. And as a result, the Labour Party has to appease them. They have to give them something in return. That's why they have this justice minister called Shabana Mahmood. You know, she opposed the idea of giving life sentences to Pakistani rape gangs, citing that it will only aggravate the problem. Shabana Mahmood, she's a Muslim. How convenient. So the idea that you have to be 51% in order to overthrow a system, that's not necessarily true. If you can be 15, 20% of the population, you can have a massive sway in the policies and the political future of your country. And Muslims who are currently at 6.5%, it's only a matter of time before they become 15 to 20%. And it's not only just through the ballot box. They have significant street power as well, which intimidates a lot of people, as we saw in the wake of the Southport riots.
I don't think he was entirely joking.
Yeah, I agree.
Is it an impossibility that 20 years from now, it will be the UK, not China or Russia, that will emerge as the greatest strategic threat to the USA? Born out of a broken relationship and weak leadership. What happens if the UK falls into the hands of Muslim fundamentalism? Our legal system gets substituted by Sharia law, and our nuclear capabilities vest in a regime not dissimilar to that of Iran today. Regardless of whether one thinks this is a realistic outcome, which I do not, should we not have the courage to ask these questions and look at where our country is heading? But now, thankfully, the tide is beginning to turn towards freedom. If the freedom revival fails in the USA, we all lose, and the loss would be irrevocable. Technology, digital IDs, controllable digital currencies, the absolute power of global institutions.
I think she goes into other topics after that. This is brilliant, guys. This is brilliant. Suella Braverman is a former Home Secretary, and she had a bright future ahead only when she was sacked by Rishi Sunak, spineless Rishi Sunak, because she mentioned Pakistani rape gangs, and she paid a very heavy price. However, she went to Trump's inauguration recently, so I think she will be supported by Trump at some stage. And if I was a British citizen, I would love to vote for her. I like her more than Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage is a cop-out. Nigel Farage just dissed Tommy Robinson again. And he doesn't realize that there's nothing special about Nigel Farage. It's the narrative that he's peddling that is very popular. And who's the king of that narrative? Tommy Robinson. So I can understand you can't support him or endorse him, but at least don't diss him. So UK's general election is still 4 years away. A lot can happen in those 4 years. Right now, Nigel Farage's head's in the clouds because I think in some polls, it's the most popular party right now. If general elections were held today, Nigel Farage's Reform Party would probably have a lot of seats. So I think his head is up in the air. He thinks that it's all him. It's not him. It's the narrative. It's this narrative that we need to do something about the rise of Islamist threat, or we need to do something about mass migration. That's the narrative. That's a very powerful narrative. And that's the narrative people are being attracted to. Not Nigel Farage's personality. Nobody cares about Nigel Farage. So I think he's going to make many strategic mistakes. And this void will be filled. And I think a more saner political party will emerge, or a party that is more in touch with reality will emerge. I think that's what's going to happen, because a lot can happen in 4 years. Put it this way, when we'll be having next elections in the UK, the US would also be having its next presidential election. So we would be living in a very, very different world. We don't know what kind of an impact Donald Trump's policies would have had, or what kind of America he would leave in 2029, but it would be a very different world. Anyway, this is good news. A mainstream politician is now not mincing her words, and she's calling a spade, and that's what we need. And this has always been one of the biggest objectives of people like us. I hope you liked today's video. Like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, ta-da.